Hey everyone, welcome to the Grit and Grace podcast. This episode features one of my best friends in the cattle business, Amanda Wall from Iowa. And ironically, I think we became friends just over Facebook. I don't even exactly remember when, but I started seeing a lot of content from Amanda that I felt was really inspiring and encouraging. And just by seeing her content, we started a friendship over Facebook. And we have become very close friends over the last 5 years or so. And she is just a woman who has excelled at everything she's done, from a family to ranching to farming to her career. And she has so much just knowledge and wisdom in areas that I think every young woman should listen to, whether it's family or career or life or just any of that in general. And she speaks so well and with so much insight and wisdom. And this is an episode that I hope many moms and daughters listen to, and women who are starting their career, because it's just full of information that will be so useful to everyone. So sit back and enjoy this hour-long episode with an amazing woman in agriculture, Amanda Wall. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Grit and Grace podcast. I'm today's host, Rachel Cottrell, and today we have with us Amanda Wall, who is a Hereford seed stock producer and genetic consultant, ag mom, stock show mom, farm wife at PAW Livestock near Pleasantville, Iowa. So welcome, Amanda.
Thanks, Rachel. It's so great to talk to you. I haven't seen you in forever, but it's great to talk.
I know. I feel like we talk on Facebook, or I at least like your content and you like mine. So I feel like we almost like are in communication daily, but in person, no. So we like to start all the podcasts with a little icebreaker, just kind of same format as usual. So if you're ready, I'm going to kick it off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I kind of already said this, but single or married?
Married.
Okay. So did you marry your first love or did it take a while?
I feel like I married my first love. We met roughly 2 weeks into college, my freshman year at Iowa State, and we have been together ever since. So, right, wrong, or indifferent, we're still we're still together.
Okay. How about kids? Tell us about your kids.
Yep, we've got 2 kids. Our oldest is our girl, and she just started college at Iowa State. And our youngest is a 7th grader, just started 7th grade at Pleasantville. And so the 6-year gap, but I think it has worked really well because now we can kind of spread our focus. And with him going into junior high, we've had to really kind of recalibrate and make sure that we're on our A game because there's a lot more coming at us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about social media, just quick fire questions. I know you're on Facebook because we engage all the time on there, but on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you like Facebook?
Like it versus use it, I would say like it is probably an 8. During COVID, I really groomed my content and that helped tremendously. But algorithms, I don't know. I'm not a fan of algorithms, but they're necessary.
Mm-hmm. Okay, how about Instagram? Are you on Instagram and how do you compare that?
I'm on Instagram, but I don't use it as often. I like Instagram better, but I would tell you that I'm not a techie. I grew up in that era where, we barely had internet when I went to college. And so I'm just not as familiar with Instagram. So it's something that I need to learn more about, but I like it better than Facebook. I would give it a 9 out of 10.
Nice. Are you on TikTok at all?
I am not on TikTok. I have not adopted that trend.
Okay, what about your kids?
I think Addison may be on TikTok. Brody is definitely a no. Too young for social media for him. I think my husband can view TikTok videos, but I don't think he's ever done one. I hope he's never done one. I don't know.
Yeah, right. Right. So I'm going to take a wild guess here and maybe say you are not on Snapchat, or are you on Snapchat?
Correct. Yep. I am also not on Snapchat.
We're learning, like, right? We're having to adapt and learn to all, because I'm sure, like me, you remember when Facebook first came out and when Instagram first came out, so we're old. Okay, on a daily basis, just like day to day, on a scale of 1 to 10, how fixed up do you say you get on a daily basis, like hair, makeup, outfits?
Well, if I know that I am going to see someone in public, I'm probably a 3 or maybe a 4 if I'm lucky. If I'm at a business meeting and I know that there's going to be someone I run into that might recognize me, I at least try to be a 5 or a 6. But I jokingly say often I try to not look homeless if possible, but there's no guarantee.
This is why we are best friends because yes, I had to like last Saturday I was trying to decide if I wanted to if I was dressed okay enough to go into the local grocery store and I would say I was at like a 2 or 3 and I did it. I just went in. Uh, okay, so on a normal day, like with all of the things that you have going on, what time do you ideally like to get up and what time do you ideally like to go to bed?
I like to get up between 6 and 6:30. My day functions at that time the best. If I get up earlier than that, I kind of feel like I start to hit a brick wall later in the afternoon. Later than that, then I'm just kind of running my tail off and feel like I'm behind the schedule. So definitely 6:30 in the morning is my ideal time. I'm definitely in bed by 10:30 every night. I love to go to bed about 9:30 and read before I fall asleep. That's on a good day. I love a good mystery, like police mystery novel, and I don't have any idea why, but that's my go-to right before bed.
I like that. Okay, last icebreaker is on a scale of 1 to 10, what is your stress level kind of currently?
Because it's Thursday right before Friday, I would probably say we're about a 6, maybe a 7. And that's only because we've got a junior high football game tonight. And I was told last night by our 7th grader that we needed to bring our A game. So I feel like I should be stressed, even though I probably am not.
Like your A game in terms of like fan support or what? Okay.
Like he needs amped and I have to bring the amperage.
And it's only 7th grade, so like it's just starting.
Yes. And like I don't really even know what that entails. I wasn't provided a cowbell. Like there was I don't know.
Face paint? I don't know. I don't know. So that is fun. Our next section of each podcast, we have a listener submitted question. And just for a little bit of a like a disclaimer, if you are listening and you want to submit a question, you can do that on our website at ranchhousedesigns.com. We have a page for Grit and Grace, and you can fill out an anonymous question and we try to take those and match them with the best guests based on the different questions. And these are really fun because it's a fun way for people to ask questions, but and get an answer, but they don't have to say their name, right? So this one I think is perfect for you. So the question is, my oldest just started college. She is an only child, and now my husband and I are really adjusting to an empty nest and what it's like sending your kid off to college. How can I manage this adjustment? I thought this was perfect because Addison just started college.
First and foremost, I think for me personally, and I'll try to say this without crying too, Addison has been my ride or die since she was 2.5 or 3. And so we have done everything together. And when Pat was traveling with the American Shorthorn Association, we spent all the weekends together, just her and I, when he was out on the road. And so she's always been my go-to for helping me calve cows if he's gone, or, getting something in the barn, or just if we need to go grab an acai bowl or go on a shopping spree or something, she's always right there with me. So I definitely have felt like in the last year, over the course of her senior year, even before college, that I needed to spend some time getting to relearn and re-know myself, because I had spent so much time investing in both of my kids that I had kind of forgotten what made me tick. And so just allowing myself, to be creative or to travel or to sit with the alone time. It's kind of weird. Someone said to me once, if you can be alone with your own thoughts, you can really be with anybody. And I travel for work. And so getting used to having meals by myself and having dinner, even a nice dinner, and enjoying it and enjoying the food in front of me, that's been a challenge. But the thing that I would say that has gotten me through it is, yes, it's challenging, but also seeing them so happy when they're on their next adventure. And I've been really blessed that she checks in often. I probably don't talk to her every day, but a couple times a week. And she makes time to make sure that she's communicating back to me all of the fun adventures that she's having. And I think that really helps my soul feel happy so that my heart can continue to grow and figure out, who I am. And I can't remember the name of the song, but I had traveled last August right as she started her senior year. And it was a song about how, a mother gives her life and her career to raising her children. And then they leave and she's kind of like, what now? And it really can be sort of a rebirth and like you deserve to be happy also. And, maybe there's things about your career that you want to chase or you want to do that you never did before. And I think also Patrick and I have had to reinvest in our marriage and take some structured time to go on dates. And, we're very fortunate that both of us office from home. And so we see each other on a very regular basis. But that very structured time as a couple, or even with friends, I have reignited friendships, whether it's breakfast dates with friends or even just a movie night with a girlfriend. And those have been really good for my soul. And I've started to learn that I really am still the 15, 16, 18-year-old girl trapped inside this middle-aged woman's body that still enjoys doing all of those fun things. And now I can go on these adventures. And I do think that having adult children, everyone tells me that every stage gets better with age. And I look forward to having my kids go on adventures, adult type adventures with us in the future. And so I think there's just so many joys that you focus on the good. And, you have to grieve it. You have to let yourself cry, but then you cry and you pick yourself up off the floor and you go do something fun.
That is excellent advice. That is amazing advice. Gosh, I think that answers that question so well. Thank you for that. How far is Addison away from y'all? Just curious.
Fortunately, she's about an hour and 15 minutes, so it's really not far. And like I mentioned, I travel for work. And so if I'm getting really homesick for her and I need to just, put my eyes on her, I can travel through that area for work and, perhaps accidentally ask her out for lunch.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, and we're lucky now because we do have the technology like FaceTime or things like that, we didn't have when we were in college to stay connected with our families back home. And so that's nice. Even though I feel like FaceTime is weird, I still just I can't get used to it, but my kids love it.
I will attest to that. I have not used FaceTime often, but I was shopping the other day for a dress for her. I was at like a discount store and she had time between classes and I called her and I said, "Can I FaceTime you and show you these dresses?" And so we did and we laughed a lot in the store, like
Yeah. You mentioned Pat and Patrick, both work from home, but let's move into our main first topic, which is really your background in depth of, how you grew up, how you got into agriculture, first jobs, current jobs, things like that.
yep. So I was an only child and raised around a diversified grain and livestock operation that my grandpa owned. My dad always worked in kind of the ag engineering field. He built a lot of large machinery, and so he would take blueprints and different things and build out large machinery. And my mom worked in like the insurance and kind of a little bit on the ag sector, somewhat, but in underwriting and different things. And so I grew up in a household where I had two working parents. And the farm, which was right up the road from where I lived at the time, was my escape. If I was stressed from school or just wanted somewhere to go and hang out. And like I mentioned, being an only child, I didn't have brothers or sisters to go play with. So I went to the barn and made friends with, the animals at the farm. And I grew up riding horses at a really young age. And then that kind of morphed into when I started 4-H and FFA, predominantly showing cattle. And then that rolled into exhibiting sheep. And eventually, my last few years of FFA actually showed rabbits and hogs. So looking back, we kind of did it all and tried it all. And I really appreciate that now as our kids have tried all of these various species. So I graduated high school, went to Iowa State, didn't know that I was going to go to Iowa State. I was looking at K-State University, Northwest Missouri State. Like I did not necessarily want to stay in state, but based on the price of tuition, it led me to Iowa State. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made. Ames was a very inviting, welcoming town. And I started out animal science for my major and decided after a couple semesters of biology and chemistry that I was a lot more focused and equipped to handle marketing and communication courses. And so they had just started kind of an offshoot of ag education, which is now its own major at Iowa State, which is ag communications. And we were legitimately, I think, the first year of ag communication majors. And so that also allowed me to take animal science classes. And so if I had stuck around for, I think, one more semester and taken one more animal science class, I would have had a minor in animal science. But that kind of, morphed into some connections with my first job out of college was with the American Angus Association's Angus Journal in their web marketing department. Learned very quickly that, that is a well-oiled machine. But also I didn't know that I wanted to be in an office every day. It was my dream job, I thought, but I quickly learned that I didn't necessarily enjoy punching a time clock from 8 to 5 and not being able to be out in front of people and moving and shaking. So we ended up moving back to Iowa because of an opportunity that Patrick took for a different position. And I worked within the nonprofit sector as a territory manager for the Iowa Soybean Association for a number of years. And I kind of dabbled in sales in that role, but never saw myself in sales. I never wanted to be in sales because I didn't think that I wanted the pressure of the quotas. And I just had a very negative connotation of car salesmen, or, it's like you go to the store to buy a mattress and somebody hounds you as soon as you walk in the door. And so I never wanted to be in sales. And so I resisted that for a number of years. And then I had a friend, well, actually, back up. Patrick told me that I would be great at sales. And again, I resisted. And so he applied for a job for me. And I didn't know he had done that. And they called for an interview. And I was like, excuse me? So anyways, went through that process and learned that perhaps sales isn't terrible. And so then I had a friend call and ask if I would apply for a job that was in sales. And that was when I started working for, it was actually a sub entity of Elanco Animal Health. It was a marketing organization or staffing agency that they used to find sales reps for Elanco. And so I applied for a beef sales position. And they called me and said, we really want to hire you, but we have somebody that has 15 years more experience than you. So we're wondering if you would take a swine sales role instead. And, I was like, well, I showed pigs my last year of FFA, but by no means do I know anything about the swine industry. And they said, don't worry, we can teach it to you. It's much easier for us to teach a cattle kid something about pigs than the other direction. And so I stepped into that role. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but it was an amazing training program. They taught us how to overcome objections and the tactics of physical sales. And so I worked a territory for Elanco for about 4.5, 5 years. And then I got hired away from them and worked in the livestock nutrition sector, which was also great. And I really got to know how to work right across the kitchen table with a livestock producer. And I quickly realized that sales was not about how much you could sell. It was about how well you could listen and how well you could solve problems. And I've always been a problem solver. And so it came very easy to me. And quickly over time, I learned that sales was where I needed to be. And then our kids got to the age where I was traveling 7 states and gone for far too many nights a week, and decided that I needed to take a step back. And so I made a transition and started working for a regionalized feed co-op and became their sales manager, their regional sales manager for them, and loved that, but also recognized that, when you asked the question earlier about my stress level, I recognized that other people's lack of planning was becoming my emergency, and that wasn't fair to my family. And so about 2 years ago, I had an ag recruiter called me and asked if I would be interested in the position I have now. And I pushed against it really hard at first and said, absolutely not. Like my colleagues and my customers need me in the role that I'm in. And it was my daughter that sat me down and said, Mom, you deserve this position. You've earned this position. And I think you need to really consider it because you need to be happy. Like you deserve to be happy. And when I told her that I would need to travel probably a little bit more extensively than I had, she looked at me square in the eyes and she's like, "Mom, don't take this the wrong way, but my brother and I are very independent and very capable. And it's not that we don't need you. We don't need you as much as we used to right now. And you need to go chase your dreams. Like, you need to do this." And so I pushed forward, went through the interview process, got offered the job, took it, and it was the best decision I ever made. Like, never looked back. And I had a lot of what I would call questionable or subpar bosses in the positions prior, and it's just a matter of people that haven't been given the training that they need for management. And it's not their fault. They just don't know what they don't know. But I can honestly say I'm in a role now where management is amazing, colleagues are amazing, the professionalism is amazing. And the last 15 years of walking through mud, you can't experience pure joy if you don't have disappointment or failure along the way. And so I can now look back and go, I had to go through all of that to get to where I am. And I think it just makes everything worth it and just gives you such an amazing perspective of professionally what you can achieve and where you're at today.
I just want to start the slow clap right now because that I feel like that whole summary that you just gave is something that I wish every young woman who's, like who's starting college could listen to that, because you so eloquently covered topics of, work-life balance and being a mom and career aspirations and like the whole gamut of everything that so many of us older women now have gone through, and you've lived it. That's why, obviously that's why we asked you to be on this podcast, because our theme is grit and grace, and you have been through both gamuts of that, the grit and the grace. I love it. I jotted down a lot of things I wanted to talk about after that. The first one is, you mentioned you work for the Angus Journal and that was your dream job. I wonder if you remember what year that was, because that was also my dream job. And I wonder if we applied for the same position.
So I was class of 2004, but I graduated December of 2023 because I graduated early and I wanted to get out. At that time, the ag economy was kind of in a slump, and there was a lot of people graduating that couldn't find jobs. And so I decided the semester before that I was going to bust my tail to get out of college early before all of the graduates that would flood the market in May. And so the position that it's kind of funny because the position that I applied for was in the editorial department. And I went down there and took the test and went through the interview and had to proofread some content. And they sat me down and they said, "Here's the deal. You're not fit to work in our editorial department, but you are fit to work in our web marketing department." And I was like, that's the best letdown I've ever had.
So we were not at the same specific job, but I had applied for an internship there in 2000, maybe two. Yeah, it would have been for 2001. And I applied for every internship they offered, like junior activities, editorial, everything. And I made the finals. I went there, and it sounds like we went through the same exact process, because they gave me like hands-on things. I had to edit and do all this. And even though I didn't get it, just the experience of going there and going through that application was probably one of the best things for my professional career, because like you said, it's a well-oiled machine. And just for a day, seeing, their systems and their organization and everything, it was amazing. But I think there's a whole slew of us that was probably our dream job, going out of college. And then I loved what you said other people's lack of planning was becoming my emergency. And that's not fair to my family. And gosh, that like hit home for me today, because I feel like I've been going through that this week. And I do feel like sometimes as women, we might have the tendency to try to jump in and save things or fix things. Or I was like kind of in a scenario where I was part of a group that was doing something, but the group wasn't really pulling their weight. And I just said to myself, if I have to, I can sit down and get this done, for the whole group. But like you said, that's not fair to your family.
Yeah. Kudos to my husband. Like, he's been a very patient and supportive spouse through some of these very tumultuous positions that I've had in the past, where exactly that, right? Too many times I was surrounded by people that were very willing to let me pull their weight for them. And sometimes I couldn't see it for myself. And so I think that's the other thing that I would give as advice to somebody starting out in an ag career is surround yourself with people that are willing to look you in the eye and tell you the truth, not tell you what you want to hear. And whether it's a really good friend or it's somebody at work, find that person that is just unashamed to be honest, because sometimes you do need someone to hold you underwater and let you come back up.
Yeah, that's fair. And then I have to say, like, kudos to Addison for her maturity in telling you that your kids are ready for you to take the next step. And I think that's a testament to how you have raised her for the previous, 16 years to get her to that point. But that had to have been a really proud moment for you as a mom when your kids have basically said, "Mom, you've done a great job and do what you want," you know?
Yeah. And it's certainly not easy. Even still today, if I'm traveling and the youngest, Brody will call and say, "Well, I'll show you when we get home tonight." And I have to remind him, "Well, buddy, I'm gone for the next couple of days, but I certainly want to see it when I get home." It'll be okay, right? He'll live through that. And I also have recognized that me traveling, it forces independence. I certainly wouldn't want to be gone 7 days a week every week, but they are very capable, and they're more capable than they think they are. And so I think as long as parents, we provide them with the right tools and opportunities so that they can be independent and show themselves that they're capable, then we're headed in the right direction. Because ultimately, that's my goal. I've told both of my kids that they're always welcome to come back home, but that we hope that we provide them with enough tools that they don't have to live in our basement.
Right, right. And then the last takeaway I had was you said you have to eat alone sometimes, and I believe that what you said about if you can eat alone, you can do anything because I've had to do that a lot, and it's hard. You think, oh, well, eating alone is fine, but it can be really hard, to be honest. Or you travel and you've got like a hotel room to yourself, and you can watch Hallmark movies, but you want to have a nice meal, and you're like, well, do I just go sit at a steakhouse and enjoy a steak and a glass of wine? Or do I, DoorDash to my hotel room?
Right. Yes. And even you choose to go to the restaurant and you walk in and the person seating you looks at you and goes, "How many?" As if someone's in the bathroom.
Yeah, I know.
And you go, "Just me. It's me."
I used to always carry a book with me because I felt like if I had a book, I could sit down and read a book and I could occupy my time no matter what. But now with a phone, you can kind of do it with your phone. You can kind of occupy your time with the phone, but it's like struggles.
Hey, I'm Erin Thane, a busy stock show mom and marketing specialist here at Ranch House Designs. I know firsthand how hectic life can be, and that's why I love helping our clients simplify their marketing. Working with us starts with a 15-minute strategy call, and I'm one of the first people you'll talk to. I'll listen to your business goals and help recommend the right next step, whether that's a fresh new logo or a custom website to showcase your brand. From there, our team takes care of the heavy lifting and makes the whole process easy. So if you've been thinking about updating your marketing, now's the time. Request your free consult today at ranchhousedesigns.com.
We talked a lot about y'all's professional career, but we haven't talked much about PAW Livestock. So do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Patrick and I both grew up raising cattle, being around cattle. And we used to live kind of close to Ames. We lived up by Story City, and we had a small acreage, about 20 acres. And we were just faunching at the bit to raise some cattle. And so we bought essentially some leftover show heifers from a guy, which was probably the best learning opportunity that God could have ever provided, because anything that could go wrong did go wrong. So we, it was like from drinking from a fire hose. But I was about 8 or 8.5 months pregnant at the time, and Patrick came to me one day. So where we live now was where my great grandma lived, and she raised her family. So where my grandpa grew up, and she had moved to assisted living, and the house and the farm were empty. There was nobody occupying this residence. And so I was 8.5 months pregnant. My husband comes to me and he says, "Hey, have you ever thought about moving back home?" And I mean, I was full on nested, right? I had all the kids' clothes hung on hangers, like, I could have this baby any day was what my mindset was. And instantly I was like, "Oh, there is no way that we can swing that." And so what fell out of my mouth was, "I tell you what, we can move back home, but if we do, we're raising Hereford cattle." And I thought that that was gonna be the hook that got me out of trouble, right? I thought that he'd say, "Well, I'm not gonna raise Herefords." And instead, he said, "Okay," and walked back in the house.
Oh my God. Well, what would have been his breed of choice?
He grew up with Angus for the most part. And I just assumed, because he was working for the American Shorthorn Association at the time, and we had kind of gradually transitioned and brought some shorthorns into our small herd up there, that he was going to want to raise shorthorns. So I really figured that the Hereford thing was off the table. And my family had always raised Herefords. My grandpa had started bringing some of the wonderful Solaire and Canny and Simmental bulls into the Hereford mix, back in the 80s and 90s. And so I grew up around him having kind of some purebred Hereford cows, but then predominantly a commercial based herd. But my great grandpa, they started when they raised cattle on this farm that we live on now, they started with Herefords. And so just in the back of my head, it was like, well, if we're going to go home, then we need to kind of reinvigorate the heritage of what my family used to own. So anyways, you kind of fast forward and the ball keeps rolling. And so we renovated the house that we live in a little bit and moved in. And then, of course, we've always been very close friends with the Louderman family over in Illinois. And we called up Cody, which is an auctioneer and, runs all over the country. And we said, if you ever happen to run into somebody that's wanting to get rid of some cows, give us a call. We're looking to get into Herefords. And keep in mind, at that time, we lived on where we live now, which was just 3 acres. And we didn't necessarily have a plan for pasture. And we thought it would take a while for Cody to kind of round up somebody that was looking to disperse. And 2 weeks later, he calls and says, "Well, I've got somebody that's looking to sell out." so, so anyway, we bought about 25 purebred Hereford cows to get started, and found some pasture to rent, which was full of multiflora rows. And, there was a reason that it was for rent. And we just kind of dipped our toe in. That first year was also interesting because we had all the problems that you could encounter with Herefords, not only pink eye, but we had major prolapse issues and udder scores that were horrendous. It's just all the things that people warned us about of the breed. And we scratched our head more than probably any year since. And that was when we really started we found a really good local vet, and, I would say created our board of advisors, if you want to call it that. It's the people locally that you depend on that you can call at any time of the day and they'll help you and give you advice. And we quickly realized that we had taken these cows off of a diet where they were only eating forage, hay and maybe a little bit of silage, but for the most part, just grass. And we were supplementing them with distillers because that's what we had always done with these crossbred and shorthorn cows. We didn't know any different. And we learned later that that was probably contributing to our prolapse struggles, a little bit of genetics, but likely the feedstuffs. And over time, we've culled those cows out and we've gotten rid of them, and we used them as kind of a really good base to start off with. And as I look back, I think, and frankly, we've only been doing this Hereford thing. Brody is 12, and we moved here when he was just barely an infant. And so we've only been doing it for, just a little over a decade, and we've made tremendous genetic progress just because we cull down. We're very stringent on our culls, and I might be jumping ahead on this in terms of what you're wanting me to talk about, but we don't have a lot of old cows, and that's not by design. That's because the terrain in which we run them on, we bought a farm a couple years ago, and there's just a lot of ups and downs in that geography. And, there's fresh water that runs through the middle of it. So they're standing in water when we don't want them to be. And, their feet have to hold up and their eyes have to hold up. And so anything that we have a problem with and they need to be very low maintenance, they typically, they get culled out and we'll replace them with the females that we raise because they do so much better in our environment if they're raised in it to begin with than something that we've brought in. And so I think that's really what sets us apart from, some of the other folks around us is that we have a lot of repeat customers that come back for the females or for the bulls because they're just so hardy and they're very fault free. And I don't say that to be facetious or, like tongue in cheek, but Patrick is very stringent on what we select and what we breed and what we bring in, like even eye hood and eye pigment and, the shape of their eyebrow is a big thing for us because they have to be able to graze. And, we hope that we don't constantly have a pink eye problem. And so we had a bull that we bought a couple of years ago and we used him one season and then we traded out. We got something different because we didn't like the shape of the calf's eyes. So it's just, various things that we're very selective on.
Yeah, that's a great little background. That was amazing. So I had a little bit of a crush on Cody Louderman myself back in my Michigan State days. That was like a side note. That was like 2001, and he was like the star judger, but he was not interested in a Texas girl. But I definitely know him, and had a huge crush on him. So you mentioned the farm. When y'all moved back to your current home, I'm curious, did you have to purchase that from your family? Were you able to move in? Were there like siblings or cousins that were in the mix that, also might want to live there? Or how did that kind of play out?
So part of it was predetermined years ago. My grandpa was one of three boys. And so the other two, one of them went off to war and the other one moved out east. And so he was the only one that continued to stay and live and work on the farm. So for as long as I can remember, he stood to inherit where he grew up, which was where my great grandma Jessie and Grandpa Stanley raised their family. And ironically, my mom is an only child and I'm also an only child. So the plan always was for my grandma Jessie to gift or for my grandpa to inherit the property where we live and the surrounding farmland. And when we moved back, for the sake of tax purposes and just, liability reasons, instead of him inheriting it directly from his mother, he gave it to my mom. And we did actually purchase the farm from my parents. And I'll be honest and say, not for the amount of money that it's worth to a realtor. I think that's one of the things that I'll be straight up honest about, that we've been able to provide additional opportunities for our kids because of where we live and the financial situation that my great grandma provided to my grandpa and then to my mom and then to me. That's a gift that not everyone is fortunate to receive. But I will tell you that the level of upgrades and construction projects that we have done, perhaps we should have started over, but I couldn't bring myself to tear down the house that my great grandma Jessie designed and, that a local artisan built. And so we have just done the best that we can to make it work for us. And the exterior of the house is in great shape. And so we just had to make the inside feel more like it was for us instead of like it was built in 1949. And ironically too, the barn that I had all of my livestock projects in as a kid was on this property, but it burnt down. It was a barn built in the late 1800s, and they used to raise and show Percheron draft horses. And so it had the big, huge timbers and, the old white oak barn boards all over everywhere and the built-in haymow. And, it was just a beautiful, architecturally sound structure. And then it lit on fire and burnt to the ground. So when we moved here, and that happened when I was in my early 20s. So it was after my livestock projects were out of that barn and it was just sitting empty. But when we moved to this property, there was nowhere to keep livestock. There's a big machine shed and like a small block barn that we now have some chickens in. But we took the equity from our house in Story City and we built what we consider our show barn today. So it's a metal framed, not a Morton, but referred to as a Morton. And over the years, we've kind of upgraded and, changed some things within it that, and everyone told us when we built it, it'll never be big enough. And I would say, yes, I wish it was a little bit bigger, but it works really well for us based on the square footage that we've got. And we've had all of the kids' projects. And so it's been amazing for those kids to be able to walk, 50 to 100 paces outside to go do their chores or to go rinse their steer or do whatever needs done instead of having to drive 8 to 12 miles outside of town, to some old building that somebody's not using. So that's been a great blessing. Yes, it's been an amazing blessing.
That is. If you had to summarize what have been some of the kind of the highlight moments of y'all's Hereford involvement, whether it's like a show win or just a personal achievement or anything like that, what would some of those be?
Absolutely. Well, I was going to say I have two, but I probably have three that surfaced to the top. The top two was back in 2020. We all know what happened when the world shut down and all of the livestock shows started getting canceled. And of course, our kids went home for spring break and then never went back to school. So I can remember when about April 10th rolled around, maybe April 5th, the weather was nice and Addison was getting pretty stir crazy. And she just started going to the barn and working with this heifer. And I can remember going out there and saying, why are you bothering? Because we don't even know if we're going to ever show her. And she looked at me, and I love her so dearly. She's always had amazing conviction, but she looked at me and she said, well, I might as well work while everybody else rests because I'm not going to get outworked this season. And if they ever do open it back up and we are allowed to go to livestock shows, I want to be ready. And so I was like, okay, right? And looking back on it, I think that's probably what held her together because she was in junior high and socially she couldn't interact with any of her friends. And so she worked hair and she worked with that heifer, and we ended up going to the Iowa preview show. And, I think that was the first show we'd even been to. I hadn't had this heifer out anywhere. And we can get pretty barn blind. I would say that Patrick is the critical eye and I'm more of the glass half full mentality where I think all of them are champions until we go somewhere. And we ended up winning the preview show, and we had won the preview show one other year, but it was a heifer that we had bought. And so we won the preview show with this one, and, we had raised her. And so that was pretty cool. And so we embraced over that. And then they changed junior nationals to Kansas City with everything. And so we went down to the Hereford junior nationals and ended up being reserve division with that same heifer. And I will never forget it. The name of that heifer was Hello Darlin'. And so hearing Shane Bedwell's booming voice over the loudspeaker at the show, say reserve division champion PAW Hello Darlin', that was pretty amazing. And I have a phone recording of that and play it if I'm ever having a bad day. So that was incredible. And then kind of fast forward, we brought that cow home and we flushed her a couple of times and put in some embryos. And her son, a steer out of that same cow, Addison showed this last year, and he looked a lot like his mother, but probably deeper bellied. And he ended up winning our county fair, which was something that she had done the first 2 years in 4-H and then had not been able to repeat it. And years ago when she won the county fair, the showdown in Iowa, they have like a regional showdown system that they started a few years back. And she made it to the showdown, but the showdown wasn't quite as elaborate and as well run as it is today. And so she's been trying to get back to that showdown ever since. And so she ended up winning her county fair and getting to go to the regionalized showdown. And then the Herefords in Iowa have a steer futurity. And so she was able to not only win the Hereford steer futurity at the Iowa State Fair, but then also was reserve Hereford. And there's some money that's involved with some of that as well. And so she got 3 really large checks. Oh, and he won average daily gain for the Hereford steers also. So she got a check for that too. But anyways, so she got 3 really big checks for the steer at the Iowa State Fair. And so it's super sweet because it's out of, it's a son of that heifer that she showed back in 2020. And that part was pretty fun. Yeah.
So you got to clarify something about Iowa, but I know down here in Texas, It's pretty rare, if ever, for a Hereford to win the county fair, but is that the same in Iowa? Like usually the crossbred wins. So when y'all won the Hereford, was that kind of a rarity?
Yes, I would say it's not of the norm by any means. We knew that the judge going into it would want a steer that was sound and finished, like ideal market weight type of thing. So the steer that we were showing, he had been clicking along pretty easily at least, 3.25, 3.4 pounds a day. And so we knew that gain was going to be good, and he ended up being well over that for county fair. And so he ended up winning the carcass contest as well as the daily gain contest. And then we got out there with the crossbreds for grand. And, there's just something about a steer that's balanced. And, was he the biggest hipped one out there? No, I'm not going to pretend that he was. But for a Hereford, he was pretty stout. And so I think we got lucky a little bit because the judge recognized for a breed steer how truly unique he was. And I don't know, I'm probably biased as a Hereford breeder, but it's easier to put a big hip in one that's part Charolais than it is when they've got a a red face and a feather. So I think that definitely added added to our benefit here.
That is definitely awesome. Okay, I want to move into our last section, and clearly you know your stuff. Like you just explained your whole entire breeding program and nutrition program and selection and all of that, and you know it. You know your stuff. But have you ever experienced any type of stigma, like as a woman in the cattle business or in the sales business or anything where you felt like you might have had an unfair opinion given of you or anything like that?
On your side, you can't see me nodding, but for sure. And ironically, I would say less from my customers and more from my colleagues and managers. I can remember when I worked for Elenco that I told my boss, and I believe this wholeheartedly, I learned very quickly that I had 30 seconds or less when I drove in the driveway to make a positive impression on that producer, or he was going to turn his ears off or walk away, right? Like ask me to get in my car and leave. And that it was even more important for me to do that as a female. And I don't mean that to be sexist in any way, but I grew up in a generation where my grandpa was my role model. And I knew that if I was pulling in the driveway of someone like my grandpa, that I had a very short window of time to prove that I wasn't just there for a pretty face. I was there because of what was in my head. And I worked really, really hard. I've even told my kids that they need to have a quality elevator pitch. And so I worked really, really hard on not only my elevator pitch, but figuring out what types of questions that I needed to ask in order to get that other person talking or to at least invite me to stay long enough to have a conversation. And it's probably one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do, but definitely one of the things that has been the most beneficial in my lifelong career. Now, in terms of, people saying or acting a certain way, I mean, frankly, I had somebody recently tell me, you should really write a book. And I thought, oh gosh, I don't know that I need to document all of these situations to have to relive them. And I am going to tell this one particular story just because I think that it gives context. Is I can remember I was in my early 20s. We were at a very professional event. And it was when I worked for the Iowa Soybean Association, and there was a board of directors, and the board happened to be all men, which was fine. And one of the middle-aged to 60-ish year old men, he went to hand me his business card, and whether he did it on purpose or he did it intentionally, I'll never know. But we were standing, there was like a group of people talking kind of in a circle, and he went to hand me his business card and instead handed me his hotel room key.
Oh, oh,
Right? Right.
oh.
So I handed it back to him in front of these other men that were standing there and said, that one doesn't have your contact information on it. Please hand me the one with just your phone number. And right. And so there are so many of those situations that I have been around or been involved in that they take your breath away. And so, again, I don't know if that was intentional or just accidental, but I think that there's some of us that have walked through fire or trudged through mud because back in the day, 20 years ago, there was one or two women in a whole room full of men. And now you go to events and there might be 10, 20, 30 women in a whole room full of men. And the dynamics are starting to shift a little bit. Men are a lot more willing to listen to information from women. And when you look at the enrollment numbers at some of these land grant universities, they're going to need to get comfortable listening to women because there's a large percentage in the ag sector that are coming in that are female. And especially on the swine side, one thing that I have noticed is that, some of these swine farm managers, they will specifically hire female employees to work in their sow farms because they're nurturing, they're loving, they're grace filled, and they're patient. And so I think we really, as an ag industry, need to look at what men and women do best and allow them to shine with their strengths and embrace the differences and the positivity of different genders. And I can also say that, previously working in a cooperative environment, I'm not as physically strong as some of my male colleagues. And so I had to learn how to ask for help and to be very transparent about the fact that it's not because I'm weak. I'm not trying to be weak, but I'm just the physicality of this. I need assistance. And so my greatest advice for somebody that's stepping into a role in the ag sector, in the ag world, is don't become brash, but also do not become a doormat. You have to learn how to balance that, and you have to be able to communicate through that because you're going to work with people that just frankly don't understand it. And you have to be able to figure out if they're willing to understand it and to meet you halfway, or if you need to seek out another job. Because sacrificing your own belief structure or sacrificing yourself for a paycheck, I can tell you firsthand that your mental health, that long term is not worth it.
That you should write a book. I would buy it. That was amazing. I'm still just kind of aghast about the hotel thing, but I'm not at the same time too, because I mean, I haven't had that type of situation, but I think many of us have had, awkward situations. So as a mom of, my daughter is 14, she's sort of aware of these type of scenarios, but we really haven't sat down and had, real specific talks. But I'm wondering at what age, if you have brought this type of scenarios up with your daughter, who's now in college, or as moms, what do we share? What do we not share? So we can help equip our daughters with the skills like you had to be able to diffuse that situation like you diffused it in a way that, was not confrontational, but it also gave the message that, no, sir, I'm not interested. Have y'all had any of those conversations?
So we have, and I would say that those conversations probably started to come hand in hand when she got into high school and began participating more in FFA types of events, and not from a difference in men versus women, but just being aware of her surroundings and being savvy of the world. Don't walk from point A to point B with your nose in your phone, and just being out and about more than going from school to home and vice versa. The one thing that I can say, and I would highly recommend, like highly, highly, highly recommend, is, and this came because of some friendships or some, we know what kids can be like, right? We know that kids can say hurtful things. And we recognized probably when she was 15 or 16 that we were not fully equipped as parents to be able to handle all of these conversations without help. And so we reached out to, at that time, like a local social worker. And every now and again, we've just got various people in the medical mental health community that we can reach out to. And I have gone with her to some of those sessions. Patrick has gone with her to some of those sessions. And those things, depending on the provider, and if you have somebody you don't really like, then you go to a different one. But being an advocate for your child so that they can learn how to communicate in a way that is effective without being snide, to stand up for themselves and know what that needs to feel like and sound like, and having someone outside of their family tell them that that's okay. It's one thing when your mom says, well, yes, it's okay to stand up for your feelings. That's different than having a professional that sees kids your age tell you that absolutely it's justified and valid for you to tell somebody that that was rude or that was uncalled for. And it's not going to look the same for every kid. You know, I think that's something that when I look back or when I evaluate what we've done as parents is we've tried to parent each child as their own individual self, and whatever their needs were at the time, we didn't brush it under the rug. We didn't hope that it would go away. We dealt with it, and we faced it head on. And I think that's why we have great relationships with our kids, and they're willing to come to us and ask us questions, and I never back away from it. To your question of when have you started having these conversations, there's ways to have the conversation without giving too much detail and making it awkward. If you don't know how to have that conversation, then phone a friend that has a kid that's older and ask them how they had the conversation. Because you have to communicate about the hard things in life. Otherwise, it hits them upside the head.
Yeah, that is amazing advice. Thank you so much. That helps me, and I know it will help many of our listeners. That was great advice. Well, we've come to, by our outline, the conclusion of our podcast, and I have 2 wrap-up questions, but I honestly almost hate to ask you because this episode has been so insightful and so, like, I don't know the word, but deep and impactful and insightful, and you have talked about a lot of things that can really help people. And so these last 2 questions are totally fun, and I almost feel a bit frivolous asking, but will you bear with me and allow me to ask?
Oh, absolutely.
So the last one is, where is your favorite place right now to shop for clothes?
Oh, gosh.
Even though we both agree, I mean, like right now I'm wearing like a junior national t-shirt, like, that's my attire.
Okay, so here's the answer that I'm going to give you, and then probably what I should say. So the answer I'm going to give you is my favorite place to shop for clothes right now is probably Ross Dress for Less, because there is a brand of sweatpants that are my absolute favorite, and they're only $12. And I just bought 2 pair the other day because I can wear them to chore and to work in my office. But that's probably not what your listeners really want to hear.
Hey, that's what I would like to hear. Yeah.
They're straight leg. They're the best thing ever invented. But anyways,
I get all these emails myself that are like, the theme is weekend wear, like, and it's like sweatpants, but they're fancy sweatpants. And I've like accepted that this is pretty much like my daily wear. What they're referring is like high-end weekend wear is what I wear every day. Okay, so the actual last one is favorite brand of mascara. And we ask this every time because we acknowledge that as women in agriculture, we all have different styles and different, preferences of how we like to dress and how fixed up we like to get and everything. But I think the one thing we can all agree on is that we all like to put on a little bit of mascara and maybe some lipstick. But what is your go-to brand of mascara?
So I have a hands down regimen. I buy the Merle Norman Black Wicked Lash. That's my go-to, always has been, always will be. And if I have a business meeting and I need my lashes to be just a little bit fuller, they have a lash builder, which in my mind is a lot like Powderful. And you put that on and it's white, just like in cattle.
Yes.
And then you put the black on top and it's spot on every time.
I love that. Well, as we wrap up, I just can't say thank you enough, because this was, like I said, such a great podcast with so much wisdom and impact that you've given. And we just appreciate you so much for being with us.
Well, I was taken back and also elated when you messaged me and said, would I be on your podcast? Because I was excited when I saw that you were starting one, and I'm like, oh man, this is going to be great content. I never thought I would be one of the people you'd ask. So I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And guys, as always, thanks for listening. We hope you have a wonderful day, a blessed day. And if you do want to learn more about the podcast, you can visit us at ranchhousedesigns.com and submit your questions, submit ideas for people that you would like to see us host. And as always, God bless. Hope you'll have a wonderful day.